June 2026. On Pakistan's K6, an avalanche of snow and rock breaks loose, and one of the finest ski mountaineers of his generation is buried beneath it forever. In its entire history, K6 has been climbed exactly once, 56 years ago. Since then, it has let no one through, and it's not alone. There's a handful of the highest giants in the Karakoram and the Himalayas that humans have summited exactly once, and never again. Each has its own way of turning people back. Snow like sand, falling rock, heat, the failure of one's own body. Why do these peaks let us in only once and punish everyone who comes back for more? On June 24th, 2026, everything comes down to a few seconds. At around 5,000 meters, the slope starts moving, and snow mixed with rock comes roaring down the face, a heavy mass there's no escaping. Beneath it lies Guillaume Pierrel, a mountain guide from Chamonix. His two companions, Christina Lustenberger and Boris Langenstein, are outside the slide's path. They survive and report the avalanche by satellite phone. What follows is something that, at these altitudes, is always harder than the climb itself. The body has to be brought down, and porters take on that work, step by step down the glacier. The helicopter that could speed up the evacuation is forced to wait. An abnormal heat wave has set in. The air is thinner than usual, and the machine can't reach the required altitude with a load. The mountain is in no hurry to release even the dead. And here's the number that makes this death stand out from the long catalog of mountain tragedies. There is exactly one successful ascent of K6 on record, in 1970. Between that climb and this avalanche lie 56 years. For half a century, the mountain beat back every new attempt. And in June of 2026, it reminded everyone who makes the rules here. K6 is no museum piece from the era of black and white photographs of pioneers. It lets no one up a second time, and it's doing that right now. Compare two numbers. By 2026, more than 7,000 people had stood on Everest, the highest point on the planet. In a good season, the line to the summit stretches for hours, and photos of that line stopped being surprising long ago. In its entire history, 4 people have stood on the summit of K6, not 4 in a season, 4 in the entire history of mountaineering. There's a special category of peaks, mountains climbed exactly once by their main, highest point, and never again. And we're talking about giants of the Karakoram and the eastern Himalayas. Most rise above 7,000 meters, and each is famous enough to draw the world's strongest climbers. People came back to each of them again and again, first for the first ascent, then for a repeat. The result is always the same. The mountain won't let them through. It turns expeditions around just below the summit, wrecks their schedule, cuts attempts short a few hundred meters from the goal. Sometimes it does this gently, simply withholding the weather, sometimes brutally, taking those who got too close. And each of these peaks has its own, utterly distinctive way of stopping a human being, a specific mechanism that works here and nowhere else. Every one of those mechanisms is still in perfect working order, waiting for the next person who decides to try. The phrase, "a dangerous mountain," explains almost nothing by itself. All high mountains are dangerous, more or less. But on the peaks in this list, the danger has a specific face. On one, the snow turns into something like granulated sugar that's impossible to move through. You find yourself on a steep slope with no footing and no way up. On another, everything is decided by the sun. While the night frost holds, you can climb the face. But by midday, it starts firing rocks at anyone still on it. And there's a mountain where the danger isn't an outside force, but the body itself. No avalanche, no rock fall, just an altitude where human lungs stop working the way they should, and the climb becomes a fight for every breath. They share one thing. Each of these mountains opens up only for a brief window, a handful of days when the climb is possible at all. Whoever slips through the danger zone within that window makes it. The mountain catches everyone else and turns them back. The mountain where snow behaves like sand is called Muchu Chhish. 7,453 meters, the Karakoram, northern Pakistan. For years it held a peculiar title, the highest unclimbed mountain you could actually get a legal permit for. Other giants like it were sealed off by borders and bans. This one you were allowed to try, and still no one could get up it. The reason is that sugar snow, faceted crystals, large and barely bonded to one another, lie on the slope in a loose layer. You can't walk on them. your leg sinks into the waist. You can't anchor to them. They slide off in whole sheets. The face looks climbable, but it won't give you a single solid move upward. The story of its defense is a chain of retreats. In 1999, a Spanish team turns around at about 6,600 meters. Then come the Czechs in 2020, 2021, 2023, and each time the mountain sends them back down. In 2023, a Czech pair reaches 7,200 meters. Only 250 remain to the summit, and there they turn back. Food and fuel run out. Their own journal describes hours of wading waist-deep through the sugar crystal mass. The breakthrough comes in July of 2024. For the first time, the forecast promises a full week of stable weather, a window this place hadn't seen in decades. 3 Czechs, Zdeněk Hák, Radoslav Groh, and Jaroslav Bansky, go in a fast alpine push, traveling light. And in 6 days they climb what had broken others for 20 years. On July 5th, at 20 past 10 in the morning, they stand on the summit, the first people in the mountain's history. On the descent, avalanches pour down the glacier around them, and Muchu Chhish closes up again. Baltistan Peak is K6's other name, 7,282 meters. Specialists call it one of the hardest 7,000ers in the entire Karakoram. And that's a region where hard is the baseline. Its only ascent happened in 1970, and the circumstances were almost accidental. A young Austrian team had originally aimed at other peaks, but the permits fell through, and the group ended up beneath K6, a mountain that hadn't topped their list at first. The expedition leader, Eduard Kobelmüller, is just 24 years old. That's remarkably young to be leading an assault on a 7,000er of this class. Then comes a test of patience. For 2 weeks, the team waits out a storm in the lower camp. There's no way up, and all they can do is wait for the weather to blink first. Expeditions usually break in conditions like these. The supplies run out, and the will goes with them. The Austrians wait out their window. On July 17th, 4 of them reach the summit by the southeast ridge, the first and, as it turns out, the only ones. Since that July day in 1970, no one has stood on the highest point of K6. One clarification, without which the story of K6 is easily distorted. This massif has not one summit, but 3 separate ones. The west summit was climbed in 2013, the central in 2020, and each demanded its own full independent ascent. But the main one, the one that yielded to the Austrians, has been climbed only once. The neighboring peaks gave in. The heart of the massif did not. Half a century later, Guillaume Pierrel comes to that main summit, a man who made skiing down big mountains his life's work. On K6, his plan is to climb up and ski back down, the pinnacle of the craft, even by the standards of his profession. The plan is cut short by the avalanche this story began with. The mountain won't even allow anyone near a repeat. Between the first success and the latest attempt lies an entire human lifetime, and the score still favors the mountain. K6 strikes from the outside, with avalanche, rock, weather. The next peak keeps its weapon hidden inside the climber himself. Saser Kangri, 2 east, 7,518 meters, northern India. For decades it ranked second among the world's highest unclimbed peaks. Only the Forbidden Mountain in Bhutan stood above it. In 2011, an American trio arrives, Mark Ritchie, Steve Swenson, and Freddie Wilkinson. They pick the southwest face, 1,700 meters of ice and rock, and climb it in pure alpine style. No chain of intermediate camps, no fixed ropes, fast and self-contained. For a long time, simply getting here was impossible, and the terrain had nothing to do with it. The mountain stands in a closed military zone near the Siachen Glacier, one of the tensest border regions on the planet. People simply weren't allowed in, and only from 2010 did climbers gain legal access to the face. Difficulty multiplied by inaccessibility. That's why the summit stayed untouched for so long. On August 24th, the team reaches the highest point, for the first time in history. By every calculation, the hardest part is behind them. But on the descent, Swenson's breathing fails. The mountain switches on its main mechanism, the body of a man who has climbed too high, too fast. Swenson is pushing 60, and with every 100 meters of descent, his condition worsens. A severe respiratory infection makes it hard to breathe. At times, his breathing nearly stops, and every inhalation has to be won by force. At an altitude where there's half as much oxygen as down below, that's a direct threat to life. On top of the physical crisis comes a second, more insidious one. Swenson's mind clouds over. He loses clarity of thought. At one point on the descent, he accidentally unclips from the rope, a mistake that in any other situation would have been his last. He can't lie down, because lying down makes breathing even harder, and he stays on his feet on the last of his strength. His partners lead him down the face literally meter by meter, taking on all the work and all the risk. Through international channels, military pilots are brought into the rescue, and now the machinery itself is working at its limit. A helicopter climbs for Swenson to 5,800 meters. That's at the very ceiling of what the aircraft can do. The air is so thin, the rotors barely keep it aloft. A second helicopter is kept in reserve, in case the first can't take off again from that altitude. Swenson is picked up at the foot of the face and flown down. He survives, right at the edge of what's possible. And the face of Saser Kangri has stood untouched ever since. No one has gone back for a second try. The next mountain took its payment in advance, before anyone even managed to climb it. Namcha Barwa, 7,782 meters, the easternmost edge of the Himalayas. Until 1992, it carried a resounding title, the highest unclimbed peak in the world. The mountain stands in the path of the wet monsoon flows and works like a storm factory. Its rock is brittle, crumbling under hands and feet, and its slopes are raked by avalanches almost constantly. All of this makes the climb lethally dangerous long before the summit. In the fall of 1991, a Japanese-Chinese expedition gets closer to the goal than anyone before. The team is strong, well-prepared, and this time it has a real chance. But on October 16th, an avalanche tears loose from above. Beneath it lies Hiroshi Onishi, one of the strongest climbers in the group. The mountain strikes at the very moment success seems within reach. After that, the expedition retreats. Going on after a teammate's death is impossible, and the summit stays unclimbed for another whole year. Namcha Barwa is the only mountain in this story where the score was opened by a death, not a victory. A year passes, and in the fall of 1992, a third Japanese-Chinese expedition returns to the mountain. This time, everything goes differently. On October 30th, 11 people climb the South Ridge to the highest point, the first in Namcha Barwa's history. And then, the mountain slips out of climbers' reach, with no avalanche at all. After 1993, the entire region is closed to foreigners, partly the religious significance of these lands, partly the politics around the great river that rises at these slopes and flows on into India. The freshly climbed mountain ends up locked away. Namcha Barwa has its own ancient legend too. The tale goes that one day the mountain will collapse into the deep gorge at its foot and turn the great river back on itself. A British explorer surveying these lands wrote the story down back in the 1920s, and it has been bound to the peak ever since. One success in its entire history, and almost immediately the door slams shut. Climbers no longer hold the key. The next mountain strikes not with cold or thin air, but with the warmth of the sun. Sangemarmar Sar, the marble peak, rises almost 5 kilometers above the valley of the Hunza River. Its defense is built on the daily swing of temperature. At night, frost welds rock and ice solid, and the face can be climbed. But when the sun comes up, the ice that worked as glue starts to melt. Whatever held until morning loses its grip and comes crashing down. The face turns into something like a bowling alley with rocks hurtling down the lanes, and anyone still on it in the heat of the day comes under that bombardment. In 1984, a Japanese team from Osaka makes the first ascent by the southwest ridge. The mountain yields, the only time in its history. 2 years later, in 1986, a Belgian expedition tries to return, and that's when the heat steps in. The daytime warming unleashes a rockfall on the climbers. One of them has his ribs broken, and the team is forced to retreat without ever getting near the summit. Since that day, no one has climbed Sangemarmar Sar. One summit, one ascent, and a reliable watchman that switches on every noon the moment the sun clears the ridge. The mountain doesn't scare people off with frost. It waits for the rock to warm up, and then it makes itself known. The last mountain is guarded by something you would never expect at these altitudes. Here, the danger comes out to meet you. On the eastern edge of the Himalayas, right next to Namcha Barwa, rises its neighbor, Gyala Peri, 7,294 meters, a white fang towering over the deepest canyon on the planet. Its wall drops toward the river in almost 3 kilometers of sheer plunge. In 1986, a Japanese team makes the first ascent by the South Ridge, spending about a month and a half on the mountain. It remains the only success in its history. 12 years later, in 1998, an elite Spanish team arrives from the famous television project Al Filo de lo Imposible. Among its members are the celebrated Iñárritu brothers. A group like this has every chance. But at around 6,000 meters, right above the abyss, comes an encounter no one can prepare for. There on the route, blocking their way, stands a Himalayan brown bear. In thick fog and foul weather, face to face with this unexpected sentry, the Spaniards make the only sensible decision and turn back. They walk away alive, but empty-handed. The mountain didn't touch them with an avalanche and didn't steal their breath. It simply posted a very different kind of guard. And since then, no one has approached Gyala Peri. Reducing all these stories to a simple "mountains are dangerous" would be dishonest and, above all, inaccurate. Each of these peaks has its own ending, and the differences matter, because people lose to these mountains in different ways. K6 took a life. The attempt at a rematch in the summer of 2026 cost Guillaume Pierrel everything, and that is the heaviest outcome there is. Saser Kangri came up to the same line, but stopped at the very edge. Steve Swenson survived, though the mountain did everything to make sure he wouldn't. Between those two outcomes lie a handful of hours and a little luck. Gyala Peri and Sangemarmar Sar claimed no victims. They simply drove the visitors away, with rockfall, with weather, with a bear above the abyss. People left those mountains alive, but beaten. Namcha Barwa stands apart. Beyond its difficulty and its storms, it's protected by a law made by humans. And here honesty is required. A ban and fear must not be confused. It's one thing when the mountain itself won't let you up, and quite another when the way is blocked by a border or a decree. These are different kinds of defeat, and passing one off as the other would be a sleight of hand. But for all the different endings, these mountains share one outcome. After a single success, not one of them has yielded to a human being again. Not once. There are fewer and fewer mountains like these left on the planet, and the list is shrinking before our eyes, year after year. Today there are at least 21 unclimbed peaks above 7,000 meters. That's a lot, but noticeably fewer than there were just recently. How fast the count is moving is clear from 2024 alone. That year, 2 giants fell at once. The first was Muchu Chhish, the Czech trio's breakthrough in that rarest of week-long windows. The second was Karakoram, a 7,000er on the Tibetan border that had beaten back every attempt for decades. It was taken in a bold dash through the last window of the fading monsoon, and for that race against time, the climb was nicknamed a buzzer beater, like a ball thrown a second before the final horn. 2 summits in a single season. Every ascent like that erases one more point from the map of the unknown. The most accessible ones go first, and the top line is still held by that forbidden mountain in Bhutan. The authorities declared such peaks sacred and closed them to climbing by law. The era of the last unreachable giants isn't over yet, but its edge is already in sight. The gaps between the falls of such peaks are no longer measured in decades, but in years. And one day the list will run out. The world long ago got used to believing that almost everything on this planet has been conquered. The poles, the depths, the summits. The mountains in this story, object by the mere fact of their existence. The last word here doesn't always belong to humans. Each of them was climbed exactly once in all of history, and the price was paid in full. Some of these peaks fight off a rematch themselves. They turn people back, maim them, take the ones who come again. Others were closed by human hands, by a border, a ban, a military zone. But the ending is the same everywhere. A second success never happened. Anywhere. Their summits were taken not as property, but as if on loan, in a rare opening when the mountain itself allowed the climb. Then it closed again, reclaiming everything it had briefly given up. Humans stood at the top, but they didn't stay there as masters. They only dropped in for a moment, and were shown the door. K6, which took Pierrel's life 56 years after its only ascent, is the clearest proof of that. As long as these last giants stand, the rule holds. A summit can be taken for a moment, but no one has ever managed to claim one forever.